Hello, I'm having trouble sleeping, and welcome to Having Trouble Sleeping. This podcast is intended for those of you like myself, those who have trouble falling asleep when you very much wish you could. I know your plight all too well, so please allow me to aid in your endeavor. If during this episode you fall asleep, excellent. If I am simply a soft voice to soothe your addled mind, to distract your anxious thoughts, to bring comfort where it is needed, that is excellent as well. I hope that by writing and narrating these episodes, I may be a thorn in the side of that great beast insomnia, that I may assist our great ally sleep, and maybe, just maybe, invite dreams to bless our slumber. Settle in now, take a deep breath, and relax your body. Go on. Tonight, I am the narrator, and we are observing Sandaron, wizard of the Secluded Apothecary. Now, no one is quite sure where the Secluded Apothecary is located. All that is known is that it is in a quiet forest where the weather is mild. Some might ask, what is the point of an apothecary if no one knows where it is? And to them I say, you are not thinking as a wizard. Indeed, the location is no great matter when one is as adept at transportation magic as Sandaron is. Sandaron himself is quite old. Though his years continue to accrue, he is no less capable, no less vibrant and lively. The only thing one may fairly infer from the neatly combed white hair atop his head is that he does not care to change its color. Having been present in the land for roughly 3 centuries, people from all over have come to regard him as one might regard a landmark, constant and reliable, to say nothing of beloved, as he is quite endeared to those who know of his deeds. For good reason, of course. Being the wizard of the Secluded Apothecary, he crafts cures to the most dreadful of illnesses. Many ought to owe him great debts, for themselves or for loved ones. The only payment Sandaron asks, though, is gratitude, nothing more. It is an overcast night tonight, cloud cover promising light rain the following morning. Sandaron, not one to sleep, read beneath the soft glow of an enchanted lantern, properly comfortable in his living room, sitting in his favorite armchair with a poorly made, yet warm, green blanket across his lap. The silent late-night studying of the ancient tome in his hands was as close to sleep as a wizard got, entranced by the words just as any man might be. Reading and dreaming are not so dissimilar, after all. In the corner, upon a mahogany perch, a pure white macaw stirred. She stretched her wings and yawned, her feathers ruffling as she shook herself awake. With a hop and a flap of her wings, she landed on the floor and walked dutifully toward a small door on the other side of the room. Her talons clacked against the wood with each step, and as she neared the parrot-sized door, it opened to invite her in. A moment later, she was gone. Sandaron set his bookmark, a white feather from that same macaw, and placed the ancient tome on the table beside his armchair, for he knew what it meant when Alida left through her door. Sure enough, her absence was brief, and she was back, clacking through the doorway with a rolled-up note in her beak. She flew up to land in Sandaron's lap, and she presented the parchment to him. He accepted and unrolled it, his eyes scanning the messy handwriting rife with spelling errors. He lowered the note and inquired to Alida regarding the so-written, evil tummy ache, afflicting the father of the author of the note. Alida responded, for indeed it was appropriate for a magical parrot to speak with the intelligence of a human, that by her diagnosis, the patient was suffering from acute food poisoning. Sandaron smiled, giving his gratitude to his assistant for her expertise by commending her reliable judgment, and stroking her feathers before moving her to his shoulder and standing. He laid the misshapen green blanket on the chair and headed to his workroom. Various plants, instruments, and apparatuses were neatly arrayed around the room. If you've ever heard the phrase, a place for everything and everything in its place, this was a prime example of it. Though it was tidy as can be, it was nonetheless a comfortable room. Wooden tables, countertops, and cabinets were warmed by the soft yellow light coming from the floating lanterns that gently bobbed in place. The large, circular windows would usually let in natural light, but the overcast clouds left the surrounding forest dark tonight. And of course, we must mention the countless exotic plants growing in pots, from minuscule to large, all throughout the room. Some were normal enough, green stems and leaves, but most were quite unusual. There was one whose leaves glowed orange, though only if you smiled at it. One whose fruit appeared to be made of gold, but tasted like silver. And one that was given space around its pot, for it had an unpleasant habit of spontaneously combusting. Sandaron opened the cabinet above his main workbench and retrieved a small cauldron from inside, setting it down on the heating apparatus built into the surface of the table. With a wave of his hand, the vessel was filled halfway with water. Lowering his head down to the base of the cauldron, he drew in a slow, deep breath and exhaled just as slowly, a thin flame following his breath to activate the enchanted stove. Leaving the water to boil, Sandaron and Alida split up to gather the ingredients needed for the tonic. Sandaron went through cabinets to collect several vials and jars, while Alida hopped and flapped around the room collecting samples from the necessary plants. The two of them made it quick work, and by the time they met back at the cauldron, it hadn't had nearly enough time to come to a boil. With the ingredients gathered, Sandaron took the time to stroke Alida's feathers. She leaned against his chest as she stood on the table, closing her eyes and savoring the serene moment. All was silent in the apothecary, the cloudy night making it seem extra subdued. As the pleasant seconds turned into minutes, it became nearly irresistible to fall back asleep. And that's just what Alida did. She was awoken after a few minutes by the sound of the water boiling. Sandaron, not wanting to disturb his assistant's rest, was using his free hand to levitate the ingredients one by one into the cauldron. Alida yawned and enjoyed the close affection for a moment longer before finally breaking away. She busied herself with picking out a jar to contain the concoction once it finished brewing. Meanwhile, Sandaron retrieved a stirring stick from a drawer and began slowly blending the mixture. Although they worked quickly and effectively to craft the cure, these things took time. With a jar retrieved and ready, all that was left to do was to tend to the concoction itself. Sandaron stirred and stirred, the steam from the bubbling mixture condensing on his hand. While the wizard took care of the brew, Alida went to retrieve some parchment. Soon she was back on the tabletop, a page laid out with a jar of ink alongside it. She dipped one of her claws in the ink and began sketching the most unusual shapes. It wasn't quite writing, nor was it drawing, but a strange mixture of the two that had an odd way of almost making sense. This, of course, was magic writing, a sort of coordinate for Sandaron to follow in order to get to the patient in need. By the time Alida finished the intricate and unusual glyph, the cure was finally ready. Sandaron left the stirring stick in the mixture and absent-mindedly gestured in the direction of the jar. It slid close to the cauldron, and with another effortless gesture, the boiling brew flowed into a stream that mocked gravity. It went upwards, to the side, and then down into the jar. As the level in the jar rose, the level in the cauldron fell, until finally there was not a single drop left, not even on the stirring stick. Steam rose from the jar, the cure still scalding hot. With a gentle knock from the wizard's knuckle, the glass frosted over, cooling the mixture down until, instead of steaming, the surface of the brew froze. Something cold was always better than something hot when it came to stomach pain, after all. Alida fetched a lid for the jar, placing it in Sandaron's hand and earning a few scritches for her help. Covering the jar with the lid, Sandaron picked it up and shook it vigorously. The mixture, cold as ice now, broke up into a slush. Now all that was left was to get a spoon for the patient to use, which was once again retrieved by the helpful macaw. Sandaron set the jar down beside the spoon and picked up the glyph Alida had made, studying it for a moment. Now, if you've never witnessed a wizard perform transportation magic, It is rather unusual to behold. Sandaron started by holding up the paper in an outstretched hand, and then letting go of it. It remained in the air as if hanging by an invisible thread. He then proceeded to do as a mime would, reaching out into the open air and grasping invisible objects. He pulled several of these unseen things in front of him, and it certainly was a good act, for it did truly appear as though he was moving something with each gesture. The wizard arrayed these objects in front of himself in an order that seemed to make sense to him, and finally, he reached behind his ear, held the imaginary object like a conductor's baton, and tapped the air where he had placed the unseen tools. Unexpectedly to an uninformed spectator, each gentle strike produced a tone, deep and resonant. With each tone, a collection of lines and shapes on the detailed glyph began to glow with golden light. 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally, with the 5th note, the symbol was fully illuminated, and the room hummed with a pleasant harmony. Sandaron placed the invisible baton behind his ear once more, and then simply knocked on the air in front of him. Except, the moment he knocked, the harmony ceased and a door materialized, wooden with a cobblestone door frame. Gathering the jar and the spoon, Sandaron gave a smile to Alida and then pushed through the door. The door was, of course, a portal of sorts, and through to the other side was a hallway, modest as can be, and barely big enough for the door. Directly ahead was another door, though this one was not magical, and the wizard knocked at it. A questioning groan came from the other side, and Sandaron responded in his gentle voice, declaring his title and reason for visiting. A relieved tone entered the weary voice on the other side, inviting the wizard in an almost pleading way. Sandaron entered to see a rather disheveled man lying in bed, his short hair sticking up on one side of his head. The unfortunate father was in no state to be concerned about his appearance. The fact that he was sitting up was effort enough, and of course, the wizard never expected formal attire from his patients. The man's eyes lit up with a warmth as he looked upon the wizard, knowing his suffering would soon be quelled. Sandaron wasted no words, being direct and brief as he handed the man the cure and instructed him to eat the slush, and the faster the better. The man eagerly obeyed, setting aside the lid and getting a large spoonful of the frozen cure. The man commented that it tasted like a fruit he had never had before, which was accurate, as it was unlikely that the man had ever sampled wire berries before. Just as the man put the second spoonful in his mouth, there was a soft gasp from the hallway. Sandaron glanced behind himself, and a moment later, 2 younglings peeked around the doorframe and spotted the old wizard. Their faces lit up as they exclaimed his name and ran into the room. Their father instructed them to keep their voices down, which caused them to glance his way and see him with the frozen curative. Excited questions came out in whispers from the giddy children, and Sandaron knelt to be on eye level with them as he answered. The older sister, no more than 7 years of age, asked what had gotten their father sick, and her younger brother asked if the wizard would show them magic. Both got their answer as Sandaron patiently explained the nature of food poisoning, drawing pictures in the air that shimmered and sparkled. The children stared in awe, intently watching as the wizard conjured characters and objects that moved to match his words. The father, too, seemed interested, watching from the other side and diligently eating the frozen medicine. By the time Sandaron had finished explaining food poisoning, the children had countless more questions, though they were now exclusively requesting that the wizard draw whimsical things. Sandaron chuckled and humored their request, allowing each of them one thing. The boy was first, and he asked the wizard to draw a dragon. Sandaron did so, sculpting the winged creature out of the air, and then asking which color the boy wanted it to be. Green, and so green it was with a tap on its snout. The shimmering dragon shook itself, flapped its wings, and flew around the room, much to the delight of the children. Now it was the girl's turn, and she asked for a princess. Sandaron asked what color dress the princess should wear, and the girl responded orange. The wizard crafted the miniature lady with ease, and soon she was lively with motion, twirling and leaping through the air, her orange dress flowing with her motions. The girl's eyes sparkled with wonder, and even the boy seemed impressed, though he soon returned his eyes to the dragon. The sound of the spoon clinking against the bottom of the jar drew Sandaron's attention back to the father, and with one last spoonful, the jar was empty. The wizard stood and accepted the empty jar back from the man, who gave his gratitude with a relieved smile. His pain had vanished entirely, freed from the agonizing sickness that had befallen him. The wizard smiled back at the man, glad to see another patient cured. Now it was time for the wizard to return to his apothecary, and for the father to put his children back to sleep. Before that, though, Sandaron asked the man if his children had been helpful during his sickness. He nodded with a proud smile, praising the two of them, though they were only half attentive, still enamored with the sparkling figures in the air. The wizard asked the father if it would be all right to bestow a gift upon the two of them. That got the children's attention, excitedly looking up at the kindly old man. The father nodded and gave his permission, and Sandaron instructed the boy and girl to hold their hands out. As they did, the dragon glided down to lay in the arms of the boy, and the princess skipped down to alight upon the hands of the girl. With a wave of the wizard's hands, the shimmering sparkles from each of the figures blew away, and what was left was a plush and a doll resembling the conjured subjects, but in greater detail. The children squealed in delight, their giggles sweet enough to melt even the most frigid of hearts. Both children clutched their new toys close to their chests, so filled with joy that their father had to remind them to say thank you. They did so with much enthusiasm, both reaching out a free arm to embrace the wizard, who knelt and set the jar down to receive their hugs. He chuckled, patting each on the back. As the embrace ended, he looked from the girl to the boy, telling them to take good care of their new possessions, and to continue to be good for their father. They promised the wizard, and with that, he collected the jar and stood. The three of them followed Sandaron back to the door that had materialized in their hallway, for the father had to put his children back to bed anyway. Warm farewells and final expressions of gratitude were given, and finally, the wizard's job was complete. Stepping back through the door into his apothecary, he saw that Alida was no longer in the workroom. As he closed the door behind him, it vanished, the knob turning into thin air in an instant. He busied himself with cleaning the jar and the spoon, magically, of course, and then set out to locate his loyal companion. Upon entering his living room, he found his macaw once again asleep on her perch. It had been a late-night request, after all, and she required sleep herself. Sandaron smiled at her, and then stepped quietly through the room, back to his armchair. He picked up the imperfect green blanket, sat down, and laid it across his lap once more before levitating his book back to his hands. He opened it to the page saved by the white feather, took a deep breath, and sighed. With another patient cured, the wizard relaxed and settled in. The night was silent as can be, not a sound inside nor outside, and with nothing more to attend to, Sandaron, wizard of the Secluded Apothecary, once more began to read.